Hey, friend, welcome to Giant Chat. This is episode 9. Got a very special guest here, Isobar. But first, I want to say a little thank you. I think I just wanted to say thank you for a while to John and Phil and Derek, Malcolm and Carrie and Gary. Your music has, you may not be watching the show, but you know what? Your music has changed our lives. And that's kind of where we're here. Giant Chat is about Giant fans. And Gentle Giant, and we'd like to bring a spotlight to Gentle Giant bands who've done something special. And tonight we've got Isobar with us, and with me is Malcolm Smith. He plays
Howdy.
the main composer and the guitarist. We have Marc Spooner. He's the keyboard on keyboards, and we've got Jim Anderson on bass. So
Howdy.
welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you very much. And just to be clear, when you referenced Malcolm earlier, it was Malcolm Mortimer you were
Yes,
talking
sir.
about, not
Malcolm
this one,
Morton.
the other.
He's
And
still
by the way, our drummer Mattias Olsson sends his regrets. He's quote unquote stuck with family at the moment, so
sure.
he can't make it in.
We'll talk about him some here, but yeah, Malcolm Mortimer. Believe it or not, he's touring with Coliseum still to this day. He
Fantastic.
I think his work on Three Friends was pretty awesome. But let's what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about Gentle Giant. We're going to talk about Isobar back into the Metaphor days a little bit. But first, let's talk about what's really exciting. This August, you released Isobar 4, and that was you also had several other people on that album. You had Can you tell me who was on violin and sax and trumpet on that album?
Yeah, we had a great violinist named Trevor Lloyd who came in and played on two or three songs, and he did a great job. And he sight read some of the stuff, which was wonderful as well as a great musician. And Ben Bojorquez on sax, Evan Weiss on trumpet, and they're on I think one or two tunes. So yeah, we had a few guests.
Well, I tell you, anybody that is, and there's lots of Gentle Giant fans. I mean, I know some of the key kind of the core inner member circle of Gentle Giant fans that have been there since the On Reflection days, and several of them they're like, oh, you got to talk to Isobar. They're big fans. Gentle Giant fans are all kind of familiar with you guys, but this album, just like the one before it, I hold Pete Pardo, the CEO of the Sea of Tranquility. I hold him in high regards. That guy has probably heard more bad prog than we've heard good. He's listened to a lot of music, does a lot of reviews. He gives some honest reviews. Okay, if the vocals are off or there's something missing, he'll tell you. But I mean, he just couldn't say enough good things about this and Ice 3. Um, gave it 4 out of 5, easy 4 out of 5 or 5 stars out of 5, and that's pretty high praise coming from him. This is an exciting album, and I think anybody that liked their first 3 albums is just going to love this one. So this is a special day. It just came out in August, didn't it?
Yeah, it was August, and it's been flying out the door. We've got a good presence in Japan, in Germany, in the UK, and of course across the US. And we're very pleased with getting it out to as many people as possible. And I also want to say that Gentle Giant has. I know we're all fans and has been a significant influence. I only wish we could actually do it as well as Gentle Giant, but I think that the discerning listener will probably hear a few
Oh
tidbits
yeah,
here and there to really show that's kind of an influence.
yeah. I think some of the standout tracks in there, for me, I really liked, of course, Rational Anthem. That's the beginning tune. Catatonic really struck a chord with me. But this music, when I listened to this album, I just felt like a person who was flying over a Himalayan range. You would go over one crest of a mountain, and then there was something completely different. Your music is complex. It takes lots of twists and turns. I know that people that like Happy the Man and early Genesis and music that just goes in all kinds of different directions are going to like this. But what was special about this album, or what was new about this one as opposed to your previous three? Was there something that you did different about this album, or something new in it?
Hmm, not
Not
particularly.
really.
Funny thing is that we put together most of the material for 3 and 4 kind of in one big time frame,
Okay.
and then we start, and so it all was in essence written and composed for the most part, for three and four at the same time. And so we released three, and then we refined four, and so it came from the same time frame in the same place. Really, I
Okay.
would say. I think
Serial.
that maybe there's, I don't know, there are slight little differences here and there. I don't know. I feel like you might hear more guitar on some of these tunes than maybe previously.
Mhm.
And we try to not repeat ourselves, but it's just what we feel like playing and feel like writing. And so it has some similarities, but I think there are enough differences to keep people pretty interested in it.
Okay.
Was literally the the first 10 that we worked on out of this batch became three, and the next, what remained, not that it was lesser in any regard, but it was just the next 10 became four.
Mhm.
And I would agree that four, in my mind, listening to it, you can't really tell, but I would say that it's slightly heavier.
Mhm.
Not that we get truly heavy or crunchy or anything,
Mhm.
but slightly a little heavier than three, which was maybe a little lighter and a little more, fusionier at times. But again, it's splitting hairs.
Okay.
So it was really just Malcolm had this batch that ended up being 10 songs, and it was just chronological. The first 10 we worked on became three, and the next 10 became four.
You said the
Not that we
reception.
planned on 10 and 10 or anything, but
You said the reception has been really good. I mean, you're seeing a lot of clicks and views and people downloading this, and that's on Isobar. Isobarmusic.com is where they main place that they go to look for this, but it's also on Bandcamp. But I really like this album. I mean, I don't I, instrumental instrumental music is kind of a different place to go. It has to be different to write. But if you're going to sit down and you know that this album is going to be all the way instrumental, I've heard some that I was, kind of looking at the clock. Some albums I was kind of looking at the clock. Is this over yet? But there's always something in each song that's fresh and exciting. So I mean, I highly recommend this album. So anyway, it's getting a lot of good reviews.
yeah,
Yeah,
Um,
it's
we're
pretty good.
pleased with the reviews, and the writing of it without vocals kind of just gives us a little more freedom, and not having to sort of figure out where to put vocals or where to leave room for vocals, which is what we did with Metaphor, which was wonderful stuff. Just a different sort of angle.
yeah, well, it's a great album. I want to touch base on one of the reasons we're here, and that basically is Gentle Giant. I know my first exposure to them, I found out about them in the Rolling Stone album guide. I was, I'd been a Rush fan and a Yes fan and King Crimson and Jethro Tull fan for years, and was just looking for, I think that classic 10-year period of prog. Um, you want when you hear new music, you want to hear something that takes you back to that or something you liked as much as that. And I was looking for that, and that's how I kind of came upon Gentle Giant. And the only place I could get it was in a resale shop. But now with the advent of the internet, that brought all kinds of new exposure. Um, and of course you know about that from the beginning days of the On Reflection and some of the Gentle Giant first beginning websites. But that was my first. When did you find out about Gentle Giant, Malcolm, and what was your experience with them?
It was probably at my buddy Stan's house in about 1973, maybe, or even
Mm,
two. And I believe it was probably, I don't know what year did In a Glass House come out? That was probably my first big exposure. So it was whatever year that was. And he had it, and it just blew my mind. And I already at that time had got my mind blown by Close to the Edge. So I was very receptive, to that different stuff. But it really did, you mentioned at the top, Kirk, it kind of changed lives, and it certainly changed my musical life. Having heard that way back then, and I have just been a complete fan ever since then. I was fortunate enough to see them in the old days about four times, and just each time better than the last. And it's such a shame that we've already lost Ray, and it's doubtful that we'll see much else out of them. But these Steven Wilson remasters are pretty darn good, and I'm hearing some new dimensions. So that's
Oh,
much
yeah.
appreciated. That's how I first heard it. Was just in my friend's house.
Okay. Do, so what about you, Mark and Jim? I mean, I know he said you're both fans, but
Oh yeah. Mine was, this was when I was probably 12 years old.
mhm.
And in the summer before the school year started, bands would play in the quad of the high school, and anybody was invited around town. And this girl who was a few years older than me invited me and her brother to go. And she said, this band is supposed to kind of be like Gentle Giant, if you can imagine some, local band being like that. I don't remember what their name was,
Mhm.
but that was the first time I ever heard the words together. And we went and saw this band, and I had no concept of where to place it in my mind or where this belonged musically. What is this like? It was like from another planet. It was so, and these were guys that were just kind of sort of like Gentle Giant, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I remember liking it though. And then a few years later, I joined my first band, and all the guys in this band had older brothers. And so this music kind of came through them, through my bandmates. And this was Genesis and Yes and King Crimson and Return to Forever and everything like that. And Gentle Giant was kind of in there. But the first album that landed with me is the one right behind you there, the live album, uh, Playing the Fool. And that was the life changer for me. I recorded it on, I didn't get it. Money was, I didn't buy a bunch of albums till later on, but I made a cassette of it and just listened to it over. And I think that's a very good entry point to Gentle Giant, to
Oh
someone that
yeah.
doesn't know them, because it's a good cross section of everything up to that point. And the fact that they could pull it off live and it was so powerful. I mean, the studio albums are fantastic, but that live album where you can hear
Oh yeah.
how they were able to do it and add power to it, and the transitions that weren't on the records, that they cleverly put things together, just unbelievably good. And along with the other one on your wall there, Tarkus, and then later on Crafty Hands, those three are very, very seminal for me personally.
Oh yeah.
But as far as Gentle Giant is concerned, it was the live album, and then I remember hearing Power and the Glory, Octopus, Three Friends, and then Glass House in there too. But then it was just everything just opened up. But it was just so different. And then later in the '90s with the prog revival with the internet, it it is truly, I think, the only band who are a genre unto themselves,
Oh yeah.
where you
Well put.
can't, you bands have little tastes of them
Mhm.
that kind of remind people. And even going back to the first Metaphor album, of a very good musician, the guitarist in my very first band, who went on to become a jazz guy, a Pat Metheny aficionado.
Oh yeah.
The first thing he said was Gentle Giant. Not the Genesis that all the other reviewers said that we sounded like. He was like Gentle Giant. So it's always been a thread through our stuff, and it's just grown more in Isobar because there's more room for it. So anyway, Jim.
What about you, Jim?
Well, I was kind of late to the party because uh, I grew up in Iowa where we didn't get much adventurous music at all. Steely Dan is probably about the most unique kind of music I remember hearing back then. And this is in the 70s, and moved to California in 76. But I didn't hear of Gentle Giant until I think mid 90s. I was working at a music company, Opcode Systems, and one of our regional sales guys, um, who lived in Minnesota, he was a few years older than me, and um, he would come out to our office every couple of times a year, and somehow we found out about each other and that we each like progressive rock, and we were just talking. I remember talking to him next to the fax machine one day, and he's like, "Have you heard Gentle Giant?" And I like, "Gentle what?" He's like, "Oh man, you got to hear Gentle Giant." And the next time he came out, he brought me a mixtape on cassette of just Gentle Giant tunes. And you know how it is sometimes when you never heard any music by a particular band and somebody turns you on to them and they've already had, several albums out, you get to just immerse yourself in this new music and it can fill up, a couple weeks just to kind of catch up. So uh like I said, I was late to the party. But man, once he turned me on the Gentle Giant, it was like, it amazes me that not only can they write the stuff and record it, but they can play it live. And I remember when the DVD came out, what was the DVD called, the Giant on the Box or something
Yeah,
like that?
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I got to see, some of their concert performances live, and it's like that was just mind blowing that not only can they write it, but they can play it live. Um, and just been a fan ever since.
And Jim, back in those days, well, more like in the 70s into the 80s, with no internet, we used to trade tapes, VHS tapes, and try and locate these performances, and really go to great lengths to. I still probably have a box of VHS tapes and taking up a lot of room. And then when the internet finally got fully going, now you can find these things in about 5 seconds, and see
Sure.
anything you want, which is amazing. But there was such a joy to getting these old tapes and being able to put that big VHS for you kids out there, VHS tapes about this big, and shoving it into the machine and having this incredible music come and just as you said, Jim, to see them actually play it live was
Yeah.
just phenomenal at the time, on tape or live. And today it's so much easier, so I hope younger folks are getting out and really trying and being turned on to this stuff in a much faster way, and not be there late like you were, Jim.
Well, this band, I would think for you as a composer, um, they have to have had an impact on your writing, or at least you're thinking about writing. Um, their music, I wish I could have been in the room with Gary and Derek when Carey was bringing out music to them. I mean, a lot of it on some of the albums, he had most of it already done.
Yeah.
And to just look at what he had written, and I mean, if you could read music, it had to be mind blowing. But um, Greg Bendian, uh, he's he's a percussionist. He did Greg Band's Inner Zone, or Greg Bendian's Inner Zone. He's got some fantastic albums, but he said that their music really just opened his mind to so many things about composing music and musical structure and stuff. But that just came out of him. That's just amazing that a person could do that.
Well,
You know,
his composing, the guy's a genius. I think there's no question in my mind, musical genius. And what I kind of, in retrospect now, I look back at what I've written and the pieces of music that I've tried to create, and that we've worked on with Isobar. You know, it really came from Gentle Giant in a lot of ways. That I look at music at the parts as sort of a bunch of puzzle pieces, but it's a three-dimensional puzzle.
mhm,
So it's not just like this; it's like this, and these different parts fitting together. And it's not necessarily counterpoint, but it's just different parts fitting together in an interesting new way. And that's what I continue to hear in Gentle Giant. I was just listening to Freehand yesterday, the Stephen Wilson remix, and hearing more of those little details, even more so than before, and hearing those puzzle pieces that they were able to put together, and at the same time, John Weathers, is just keeping that sort of steady thing in the background to sort of ground everything. Now we don't have that. Our drummer, isn't necessarily the steadying kind of concept. He's his own wild, wonderful person on the drums. But I think that's what I probably got infused into my songwriting is the ability to sort of try and put those pieces together in a way that's satisfying and interesting and parts that you wouldn't necessarily think would go together. And I think
sure.
sort of been part of the unique aspect of some of what we do.
I kind of wanted to ask um, Jim and Mark, Jim about the bass and Mark about Kerry's keyboard playing. But Jim, Ray, I mean, we miss him, and he was such a down to earth, wonderful guy. I did never get to meet him, but he was just something special. Besides the fact that he could just shift over to the drums or the violin, but his playing. Could you tell me something about, you know, how he would approach a song, or his playing that just kind of amazed you? I mean, you have to be able to pick up on that more than the regular guy.
Yeah. When I first heard him, there was just no one like him. He was playing bass lines that just didn't sound like anyone else. And a lot of times he would double guitar or whatever, but it was just so fresh and original, I guess is the word I would use.
Yeah,
That's what really impressed me the most, I think. And I remember, like I mentioned, watching some of the videos for the first time, he's kind of got this clenched jaw, and he's just like, but he's just grooving along with Weathers and just holding down that beat, and at the same time playing these amazing, licks and runs that, I still to this day don't know how they came up with some of that.
And singing at the same time.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yes, could do some counterpoint stuff, but they couldn't pull it off live like Gentle Giant could. It was pretty amazing. But I mean, Kerry, besides being an amazing composer, I mean, he could play cello, but on the keyboards, he was something special. He was really something special, wasn't he, Mark?
no question at all. People always talk about the big five of, the keyboardists in progressive rock, Emerson, Wakeman, Lord, Banks,
Mhm.
uh, who you go on and on. But why Carey is not in the top, very top tier in a lot of people's minds is stunning to me. But again, he was his own, it's like comparing, things that don't go together. His playing was such that nobody else could do that or try to be like that. They were their own planet, and he was not playing big giant symphonic parts or show offy jazz runs within rock music. He was creating parts with moving parts going on all the time. The stuff he did on clavinet, freehand being, a primary example, and then like on his electric piano just under the clavinet in his live setup, like a Wurlitzer electric that had very percussive sound too. Those parts are just mind blowing. And then the fact that then they would add a bass line and a guitar part and create this thing that made, and then add a vocal on top.
Yeah,
Just insane. I have some sheet music that people have printed out. It's like look online all the time to see if there's anything new that someone has transcribed that I haven't printed out yet. Um, and even like a couple, there's, like PhD level studies of their music that I've read and printed
sure.
out and I've kept on the shelf back there. That I think just scratch the surface on what is there. I always joke about scholars of the future making sense of all the crazy music that we play and love and listen to. Um, somebody making sense of it all. It's, I could go on and on and on. You don't want me to, but Gentle Giant is like, a British version of, I think of funk music as dance music and funky interplay between the instruments, but in a British way with that uh, medieval or Renaissance tonalities going on, um,
Syncopation.
Yeah,
along with the interplay and the syncopation. It's I wish I had more words for it to explain. It's just fascinating. Um, and then this something like I think of Me with Kindness, where it's just heartbreakingly beautiful, where
Oh
it's
yeah.
not all that intricate, like freehand or something, but it's it's just really touching and beautiful too. So they had a lot of arrows in the quiver.
Yeah.
I just wish there was more of it.
So Malcolm, tell us a little bit about you were involved with the On Reflection, that the kind of the beginnings of that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the On Reflection is a mailing list. I'm sure many of your viewers are probably already on that, and it was in the early '90s, and so the internet was just really starting out, and I was in touch with the hard copy newsletter by Gare Hasnes, I think is how it's pronounced, and I still have. I mentioned to you, Greg, I have a couple of those still. And he would write all this great stuff and have little black and white pictures, in there, and send it out, and you could subscribe to it. And as the internet came into being, um, uh, I started sort of emailing people that I knew were Gentle Giant fans, just a few. There were only a few that I knew at that time. You couldn't really reach them across the country until then. And so a couple of us started talking about some kind of a mailing list or a group or whatever you wanted to call it at that time, just to be able to communicate with each other and share our love of Gentle Giant. And so the very first list was, I mean, maybe 20 people. And I set that up originally, and then I've forgotten the guy's name, but I think he still does it out of the University of Oregon, who actually sort of maintains that. And that list grew. I don't even know how many are on there, but it is still active. I'm still on it and see it every other day. There's new messages, and they also produce that Gentle Giant conference periodically, or get together, Gorg as they call it. And I have not had a chance to go to one of those. They're sometimes on the West Coast, sometimes in Canada, sometimes in France, the UK. I hope to go to one sometime. And they have some, I think Gary has shown up to a couple of those. John Weathers, health permitting, has shown up to a couple of them. And so I'm just proud to have been a part of that early way of sort of trying to bring some of the fans, just a few of the fans together. And it really, really grew since then. And it's just been a wonderful resource as well. Any questions about Gentle Giant, that group has the brain trust to
Sure.
figure things.
Did you ever get to see Three Friends?
I did not. I think, did you guys? You guys saw them, didn't you?
Jim.
I did. I saw him at Cruise to the Edge,
Oh wow.
2014. And I'll share a little trivia
I was going to
about
say, you
that.
better tell that story.
They were playing, I think they played a couple different sets, and one of the sets one day was in this little tiny bar on the ship. And it's a big ship. It's the only cruise ship I've ever been on, but there's stages set up all over the ship, and they would print a schedule out of when all the different bands are playing. And so, when we got the list, it's like, that was one of the first ones I circled. Like, I gotta make sure I see Three Friends. And I showed up there, maybe half an hour early, and the room was already completely packed. And so I got my little space. I camped out in my space and just waited, and more people kept coming in, and it was just totally overflowing the room. And it was hot, and there was some kind of technical difficulties where they didn't start on time. So in the meantime, it just got hotter and more stuffy in this room, and more people, and so people were just busy, talking away, and I didn't really know that many people on the ship. So I'm just kind of standing there waiting, and I pulled out my phone at one point, and I just started recording the crowd noise. And we took a little snippet of that crowd noise, and we put it, it's on the intro on Isobar 4 on the Rational Anthem.
I wondered.
At the very beginning of the song, where you hear the crowd, that's the audience
Oh,
waiting
that's so
for
cool.
Three Friends to come out and play on Cruise to the Edge.
That's so cool. I kind of wondered, where was this recorded? That's so awesome. It's neat.
Yeah, it was just from my phone. And
Well,
I didn't ever get a chance to see Gentle Giant, but I'm really glad I got to see Three Friends, and Mark and I got to meet Gary one time at one of the near fests and got a chance to talk to him, and he's a really nice
Oh, yeah.
guy. But that was the first and only time I got to see Three Friends, and I got to see him a couple times, and they were amazing. That they had a keyboard player that could play all the Carrie's parts, pretty much note for note, and they had this girl playing uh, wind instruments, I think, and
Yeah.
she was amazing too.
Oh yeah.
Of course, Gary, same old Gary.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you, have you ever personally or as a band ever played around with a Gentle Giant song? I mean, you like practice it or do a cover?
There
Didn't,
was a
didn't we do that,
time.
Mark?
Do you remember that, Malcolm?
Didn't we play?
There was a time when it was pre even getting together with as Metaphor as the Genesis tribute band. So I'm talking about like in 93, 94, maybe 92 or 3, where we were learning Genesis, and we also dabbled a little bit with some Camel. I don't know if you remember that. And also there were like 2 Gentle Giant that I had, handwritten sheet music for, that I learned a few licks from, and we were kind of slowly learning. Um, it was just the same, and what was the other one?
I
I
don't
can't
know.
remember, but we kind of dabbled. So as close as we got, Kirk, was me and Malcolm kind of doing some trade-off and trying to learn 2 or 3 sections of 2 Gentle Giant songs in the middle of learning Genesis and Camel. And yes, when it was just like literally the 2 of us, and then we had a third guy come in, and then we morphed into becoming the Genesis tribute band, pre-Metaphor as an original band. So this was early and mid 90s.
While back, yeah.
Well, I would love to hear if you ever did an instrumental take on one of their songs. That would be pretty special. But I don't know. I would love to hear it. We there's lots of covers out there. Some are
Yeah.
pretty notable, and I don't know, but it'd be a challenge, I think, wouldn't it?
Oh,
Kirk, we just
absolute challenge. Yeah.
we we recently saw a band here in the Bay Area called the 1970s Jazz Rock Review, and they did do some Gentle Giant. Jim, when you and I saw them,
I,
I think it
I
was.
did too. I saw them at a different gig
Oh
uh,
yeah, yeah,
2 weeks ago,
yeah.
and they did do a Gentle Giant medley. It seemed to me to be right off of, they were just taking sections of Playing the Fool and just doing this part of Playing the Fool and then another Playing the Fool. So they probably covered about, 6, 8 songs within their one Gentle Giant medley that they
They did
put
a
on.
good job of it too. I mean, they were
Very good job.
got the chops to do it, and they have a violinist, and at least on I don't know if on those tunes, but perhaps where there were vocal parts, it was covered by violin, which was very nice as well. I don't know if that was for the Gentle Giant part of it though.
Yeah, they did that on the other, when they played a Yes medley and a
Yeah,
Genesis medley and
yeah,
Jethro Tull medley. So you'd
very
love them.
yeah.
These guys do no vocals, not even a microphone to say like thanks and introduce the band. It was just like
Yeah.
a
Like they have a
drummer and then
phobia. They have a
their
phobia
4
about,
amps, keyboards, violin, bass, and guitar. And they played at a pizza joint in Berkeley.
and it's
And
just for fun. Apparently, I mean, they
it was
don't.
just fantastic. And they're pulling off Dixie Dregs and,
Wow.
Gentle Giant. It's nothing to
Alan
sneeze at. They
Holdsworth.
were really good.
Well, we need to look them up on YouTube. Well, one of the things I wanted to go back into was your beginnings, Mark and Malcolm. You started that I have record of. You started with Metaphor, but how did you guys meet each other? What's the history with you guys?
Um, is that where I placed the ad in BAM magazine, Mark? But I,
Yeah, it was good old print
yeah,
media. It was
Bay Area, Bay Area Music was the BAM magazine in the Bay Area,
was
and
a
I,
free magazine that was at record stores and music stores,
yeah,
and there was one ads, and they even had like awards, the BAMmies.
yeah, it was a big deal.
And
Yeah,
it would be like they when Devo came through town, or they would have the Tubes on the cover of BAM magazine, and plus local bands, and Robert Barry and people that we still famous in the prog world. But there was a one ad, and it said literally Hackett, Seeks, Banks, Rutherford, Gabriel, Collins, subject, supper's ready, and then your phone number.
that was it.
And I
And
had just been in a band with a teacher actually at the time. Uh, I was in a band and we had played for me for the first time playing like accurately for the Fifth and Hogweed and like back in NYC, whatever we did in that band. Anyway, so I was feeling brave enough to actually answer this ad, and that was in '92 or '93.
something like that.
And we talked on the phone, and then Malcolm came over to my house, and we started dabbling around the piano, and he brought a guitar, and here we are.
Well, and I got a few other. Also got a call from a vocalist, and his brother played bass, and I don't know how we found Bob Kaler, that our original drummer for that. I don't remember where he came from, but that was the genesis of Metaphor, if you will.
Now, what was it? I mean, you guys have been together since late 90s. So what was it about your same musical ideas, or why is it that you guys have stayed together and clicked like you have?
That's a good question.
Sheer luck and the fact that we live about a mile and a half from each other.
And there's hardly other musicians who want to do this stuff too.
So we're very lucky in that sense.
We're lucky to find Jim.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I did want to kind of touch on Metaphor. It's a band worth checking out. I liked the first album, Starfooted. That was one that kind of clicked with me the most. But I really liked it. It's worth listening to. And it's got some. It kind of shows the direction that you were going to go with Isobar, but it has a lot of the vintage sounds that I like in progressive rock. There's a lot of nods in the first couple albums to some of the giants that you're standing on their shoulders, of Genesis and Gentle Giant, and particularly in one song, it was on Entertaining Thanatos.
Thanatos.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was Raking the Bones. There was the end section of that. I was like, that is so Gentle Giant. So there's a lot of things for people that like our kind of music that's gonna like this.
You're going to have to go back and listen to that, see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I
Don't
it just
remember.
it right away I said that is so Gentle Giant.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
you probably win the award for one of the. I mean, Stanley Whitaker or Happy the Man would be jealous of this song that I liked. Call me old and uninspired, or maybe lazy and tired, but 13 heads in the backyard says you're wrong. I thought
The
that
long
was genius. That
Yeah.
was a great song.
I think that our vocalist lyricist at the time, John Mabry, I believe that I was certainly his lyrics, and I think it was his title as well. And Metaphor worked in an interesting way. I mean, we kind of got together and put together all the music, sort of like we do now, with an ear and an eye toward vocal sections. But John is so good that even if it was a section that had some complicated stuff going on, sometimes we would knock out some of the complicated stuff. He would have it and work up the vocals on top of that. Then we put the complicated stuff back in. it's just to make it an easier process. And it just his melodies were beautiful, and it really contributed a lot. So it was a similar process, except now we do without vocals. But I think you're right, Kirk. You can sort of see if you listen to the progression of the music from the first two albums of Metaphor to the second two albums of Metaphor, how it did change and kind of got better. I mean, I think the composing got better, the playing got better, production got better, and it sort of started moving toward more complicated stuff as well. Um, and then the final result coming out of that after we were done with Metaphor, was sort of an obvious next step for us, was the Isobar style of stuff.
Yeah.
I'll also throw in, there's, real quick, I have a solo album from 2012 that is mostly instrumental that Mark and I worked on, and it's called We Were Here, and also available. And it also is sort of a precursor to what Isobar is now. So if you get a chance, Kirk, you can have a listen to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And had Mattias on drums as well.
yeah.
And Mattias is on that one as well.
And
Yeah.
John sings one song on that?
John sang one song. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So it is the link between it came between the third and fourth Metaphor album, but it shows a definite progression from that to what Isobar became. I was gonna put it a different way. John ignored our directions and just sang where he heard where vocals should be.
and it worked.
I mean that in a good way. It all worked out.
It
Yeah.
worked.
I think people
Um,
that click with Genesis and a lot of the Giants, I think they're going to connect with this music. Um, Jim Post was your original bassist, but then Jim Anderson, he kind of became part of your group around the time of is it Entertaining Thanatos? That's where
right
you
Yeah.
after
kind of
yeah.
okay.
He
That's
learned the whole first album when we actually rehearsed it, but never played it live. But Jim learned the whole first album too, so
so how did you come on board, Jim?
that's all.
Well, it was another mailing list, actually. I played earlier in my 20s, and then I kind of just got fed up with the music scene, as it were, because different personalities in the bands and stuff, and joining bands, breaking up, and I just kind of got tired of it. So I quit my last band. I didn't play for several years, and then this is kind of when the internet was just getting its feet wet too, and there was a guy that had a radio, like today you would call it a podcast, but back then it was he had a real audio show, if you will, and every week or a couple weeks he would post a new real audio file that you could download and listen to. And and usually, if I remember correctly, I think the guy's name was Dirk Evans. So Dirk, if you're out there, thanks to you, I met these other guys.
You're to
But
blame.
every week he would focus on a different country. So he might have Italy, and he would play all bands from Italy, and they would have one from France, and he had one on the U.S. in it, and he played a song from Metaphor's first album, and I didn't know anything about Metaphor. And he's like, "Here's a band from San Jose, California. It's like right down the street from me." And I listened to it, and I'm like, "Wow, that's pretty good. I'm gonna have to check that out." And then next time I went to the record store, I saw it prominently displayed in the prog section. They actually had a prog section. I think it was not starving musician. I forget now.
Rasputin.
What's that?
Rasputin.
It might have been Rasputin, yeah.
Or was it
But
the one on
I bought
Oak
the album, and like once every 10 years I get a new album that I like so much. It doesn't leave my CD player for a month. And that first Metaphor album was like that. I was just listening to it over and over, and I couldn't get enough of it. And then Malcolm placed an ad saying, "Hey, Metaphor's looking for a new bass player." And I remember writing to Malcolm just saying, "Hey, I got your album, and I really liked it. And I used to play bass, but that was a long time ago, and I hadn't played for 10 years or something." And Malcolm was like, "Oh, come on, just come out and just play with us." And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I'm good enough, and I'm probably too old for you guys. And he's like, oh, I don't know about that. Um, so but anyway, he talked me into coming down and playing with him. So I, like Mark said, I had been just to get ready for the audition. I was just playing the album over and over and playing along to it. So I kind of knew all the songs, and I came down and auditioned, and I think Mark and Malcolm and the other guys were like, "Wow, that's really cool that somebody learned our music."
Yeah.
And it was all thanks to the internet.
Well, I think your fears were unfounded. I think especially on the first Isobar album, I noticed just I loved your bass playing in that. The bass pedals and the bass, it just everything you want. I like a bass forward sound. It's the one instrument I almost always zero in on when I'm listening to music, and it's got to do something interesting. They got to bring something to it. And I really enjoyed, especially that on the first Icebar album. I dig your playing. So
Thank you.
when you got started, and we're gonna move into Isobar here, but when you got started, it was, I mean, it was hard for prog back in the 70s, but to start in the 1990s, um, what was your motivation? What did you expect to happen when you started Metaphor and you moved on to Isobar? What is it that you wanted to accomplish? What did you expect? What was your thinking getting together a band and doing this?
Well, for me, this was my Metaphor was actually my second try at putting together a Genesis tribute band, and the first one just didn't really get many responses. And my whole goal was just to play this glorious music that I loved and find like-minded people, and for the early stuff. And at the same time, while we were doing the Metaphor, the Genesis tribute stuff, I was writing, a bunch of my own material, which incidentally sounded a little like Genesis for some reason. I don't know why. And so then my goal became to, well, let's see, can we make this, can we do this music as good as we did the Genesis cover stuff? And it wasn't really about, certainly it's not to make any money or even sell a bunch of CDs. That's very nice, but it is, for me, and I think for the guys, it's our art form, and it's mostly for the love of the art of the music that we enjoy, and we write for ourselves for the most part. It really is, what turns us on, what scratches that itch for us. And if it doesn't sound right, we're not going to change it because someone else said, oh, you should do this or that. It's like, what do we think and how do we feel? And is that something I would listen to? And really, that's opened up a lot of creative doors for us because we just write what we want and what we feel, and that makes it the art. And I think that's been the driving force for me throughout all these projects is just getting, it's nice to put the music out there. I love that. I love that people listen to our stuff and we sell a few CDs. Believe me, folks, we don't make a penny off any of this stuff. And it's just for the love of the music and being able to be part of a movement of wonderful music. That's for me.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same thing. Nobody's getting rich. Nobody's even, do we even break even
Uh,
on the Isobar albums? I mean, it's nice the revenue we do get to almost pay ourselves back. Um, I'll never forget. It was again back in those days. I think it was probably 95, 96. And Malcolm and I don't know where we were going or where we were coming from, but we were in a car together and it was at night. And we stopped in a parking lot. It was like we were doing a drug deal or something.
well, we started in
And
a restaurant inside. Remember, we were in the
yeah,
restaurant. We came out.
okay. And then he played me this cassette. He was almost like, come here, kid, I gotta play you some music. And
In my van.
it was in this cassette, this cassette, and it was. I mean, I remember two songs that pretty much structurally unchanged became two songs on Starfooted. Um, with re-recorded and vocals added, of course. But they were pretty much right out of the gate done and really good. And
I
so
think
I
I
said,
handed
yeah,
you a,
I'm on
didn't I,
board to move forward. Yeah.
didn't I hand you a bunch of sheet music too?
Well,
That I
eventually we got around to all that. Yeah. But I remember just listening here. It was like
Yeah.
secret. You were like really shy about it. Like, okay, listen to this. And I said, yeah, that's really good. And it's it's really changed that much, except now we're doing it on the computer, um, in your man cave shed in the backyard.
So what is
Uh,
it like for you guys when you see, I mean, you say Malcolm does most of the composing. What is it like for you when you've seen his music? You know, he shows it to you. Has there been one or two standout songs that you've just been like, man, this is really brilliant. I really love this. What is it like when you see his compositions for the first time?
it's
Let me clarify before you answer. I mean, there's several different ways that we come at the composition. Um, frequently I have a bunch of chunks of music, as we call them, and I will bring either those to the band, or maybe I've strung a few of those together, or maybe I've got a few completed tunes. Um, but it becomes a group compositional effort.
Okay.
I'll say, and so sometimes there are tunes that that are from the bare bones become a song with all of us participating. Others have much more structure to begin with, and so then it's more or less tweaking and playing around with it. Just want to make sure that was
yeah,
said.
there's not that many that are complete that we just take
Oh,
wholesale. I can only think of one or two in all of Isobar and all four albums where it was like, this is done, you know, other than maybe some of the shorter ones from the
Well,
early.
even if I thought it was done, it ends up not being done.
No, yeah, there's only one I thought was more or less totally done, and it was just a small tweak, I think, but it became um, what is it? Short story long. First song on
Yeah.
Isobar 2 was more or less a complete piece that I was like, okay, that's good. We don't have to do too much. But most of the time, it's shorter chunks, and we put them together and try things, or change a key, or find a transitional thing that'll get from one to the other. And we just sit there and until we like it, we just keep working at least once a week. And Malcolm, because it's his space, and so he's working on it. He creates a lot of it. Then I come over, Jim comes over, um, and we just morph and try stuff and get it to like, yeah, that's cool. And then let's try something else. So it's again, it's the puzzle piece metaphor, ironically, of let's try this with this. No, that doesn't quite turn it this way. And let's see if that, oh yeah, that's those two things. That's good. Now let's do a variation and go to this other, whatever it is. And we just slowly piece it together until we're, you know, happy.
okay. So what is the playing process? I mean, if you've pieced together this composition, um, you're each how does that kind of start? Does it start with one instrument and then you're adding on your parts individually, or does any of
Yeah,
it get played live or
we've done a little bit of playing live, especially with, well, back in Metaphor days, it was more like traditional band practice where
okay.
we'd get together and play the songs, with a singer and everything. And we would do it that way. With Isobar, it's much more insular. When we're together, we're talking about it and putting it together. There's been a few like creative sessions, we call it, where we come up, have some wine and sit down and improvise, and we'll try to record that or transcribe the cool parts, and that creates parts of new stuff. But that's fairly rare. It's more, Malcolm's raw material. So once we've decided and a piece is done, then we decide, we tweak the MIDI file, make sure there's no ghost notes, and just check all the tempos and make sure all the transitions are as we want them, and get really, really in the weeds. And then we start recording, either solo or together, or I will act as an engineer for myself, playing the keyboards and also engineering it here on this very computer I'm on. Or Malcolm is, now we're doing it like the last both albums. I know Isobar 4 we all recorded separately and then put it together in Pro Tools. Um, but because the parts are so specific that, you know, it's just a matter of learning the parts that we've already written, record it, put it together, just a little bit of editing, tweaking in terms of timing. And that's even all the way through to final mixing with Robert. There's little tweaks like, oh, let's tighten that up a little bit, you know, a little bit of cheating, as it were. Um, but it's just, you know, I once I have the file, we decide like that's the tempo and that's the length of the song and those are the parts. I will just start getting into sound design mode and learning the parts, choosing the sounds and laying stuff down slowly but surely and getting it all down. And then same thing with guitars and then bass. And then we add in the, you know, the violin player comes over and whatnot. And we just build it up from nothing.
You don't really see we don't really play it together live, Kirk. It's that would be lovely to do someday. We would probably need a lot of rehearsal and maybe a couple other players cover some of the parts because there might be two or three guitar parts on a given section of a song, for
Sure.
example. And likewise with keyboards. And so we don't shy away from, multi-tracking, putting multiple tracks of ones, if we hear something we like in our heads and we'd be able to recreate that, then that's what it's going to be. So we're not so much focused on trying to get out and do it live as to making sure that, getting the recording of the compositions as good as we can get them.
Do you guys get excited when there's, I want to go into the 4 Isobar albums and rather quickly here, but do you feel excited when the album is complete and it's getting ready to hit Bandcamp or it's getting ready to hit, wherever you're releasing that? Is there a certain amount of excitement or a feeling of like, wow, this is great? Is that exciting when you?
It's fun, exciting maybe. It's also a bit of a chore, to spend time on that aspect of the creative process is less exciting, frankly, than the actual creative process of putting the music together. For me, I'll say, but it is fun and exciting to have a new album coming out and then seeing the orders come in, and it's gratifying that people like it enough to want to buy it and the distributors want to buy it, and and it's nice to get great reviews on our stuff. But I will tell you, Kirk, that pretty much by the time we're ready to put out the album, after we've mixed it, we're moving on to writing new material anyway. And so the focus has already sort of changed, and at least my mode has already moved from the publicity for the album and doing all that fun stuff to really getting back into the mode of writing new material and starting to put that stuff together and starting the process all over again. So they kind of overlap at the end of, between the end of one process and the beginning of the next one. For me, that's how it is. It's kind of exciting, but I'm really most excited to get to writing the new material. And I've forgotten who was it that said, I saw I think it was David Crosby when he was at the Ground Up Music Festival with Snarky Puppy talking about composing. And he said, every musician's, and Michael League, the bass player, said the same thing. Every musician's favorite song is the last one they wrote. It's not the stuff from 10 years ago. That's what everyone wants to hear, maybe in their case, but it's the most recent stuff you wrote. And so that's where my excitement comes from, is the fresh, new, exciting material.
Okay. Well, I will say, Isobar 1, I would say my take on it was more harder rocking. I mean, you had the drum sound was really just crashing cymbals and the bass, very bass forward. It really, if you've never heard Isobar, I would definitely start with that album because it's phenomenal. It's really good. Weekend of Mammals, that's the beginning track, and it just kind of comes on really strong. Control Mouse. I liked, there were several of them that were just standouts. One of the things Pete Pardo said is, and it's hard to do with instrumental music, is to have that be memorable. You can listen to an album from side to side and maybe not really click with you, but there's lots of good melodies in here, lots of good changes. Like I said, people that like Happy the Man, that like Genesis, that like Gentle Giant, they're going to find a lot to like.
It's
But
very,
I was kind of
very
surprised to
nice
hear
to
you
hear.
say that, like for an experience for Gentle Giant, each album, they kind of did something completely different. They were coming at it from a different direction. They had been maybe exposed to a lot of different music and had some different ideas. The music climate was changing, and so each album was kind of they were moving in a different direction. Maybe we had different instruments, but yours was more just like um, we're just going to go on and do the next thing. Is that kind of how it was?
I would say that I would argue, I think that that's probably what Gentle Giant was doing. I don't know that that's necessarily any kind of a conscious thing. They're going to play what their art demands that they write and play, it seems to me. And like all artists, I think you have inspiration and it comes from different places. And maybe you heard some stuff that sort of changes that. But speaking for myself and maybe the guys, I mean, it's not something that's consciously we're going to try a different direction or something new here. It's really whatever comes out of our brain trust, and the compositional process. And I think that's being very true to the art of music. And we're not trying to accomplish anything musical other than, at least I'm not, other than trying to write what I'm hearing in my head, and trying to put it in there. And sometimes it works, and other times I say, what was that doing in my head? I'm not going to listen to that
Yeah,
again.
it didn't quite come out the way you
That
conceived it.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah, it does happen.
We've
I
seen
would
some.
say, back to your question a few questions ago, I I do get excited when a new one comes out and you open up that box the first time and it's like, oh, it's like a, discrete piece of art that we've created. And then number two, and then number three, and number four. Um, I think it's very exciting. It's like the birth of a new child, Each one's different. They're all the same, coming from the same place, but they're all different. You love them in slightly different ways. They each have their strengths and weaknesses, if you will. Um, I think there are, just because, well, we've worked very fast, especially for these days with prog bands. The fact that we've put out 4 albums in 5 years is pretty unique these days. I keep
Yeah.
thinking, is this the 70s? Bands putting, a new year, a new album, right? I
Mhm.
wish more there was more material of all bands to listen to, that was that frequent as it was in the 70s. Um, but I do think that there are new, not influences or because we toured the world and, oh, this African music or what this music that we heard while we were in the Far East or whatever is now working its way into our music, but it's subtler. It's more like I've been listening to this, and there's this little device that this band, I want to try this one thing and it never comes out sounding like that original thing, but it's the influence of like, why don't we try this? And it becomes, the root of something is from this other album I was listening to that's not even the same genre by any means, but like, why don't we try this? Might just be some production trick, or it might be some variation where we like, let's take the flute line and make that the bass line and flip flop and make that the melody, or whatever it is, some little device that reminds me of like, oh, I want to try this on Isobar. So there's new things that's like you listen to it with a fresh ear, some old album that I liked in the 80s of some like new wave band or something where it's like, oh, this one little thing, I like that idea, let's take that and put it into a new song. So there's new influences that influence what we do in really bizarre ways. So anyway, I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, moving through four different albums, and they're all instrumental. Um, Again, I've heard other instrumental bands, and you kind of get saturated with instrumental music. One doesn't seem different from the next, and it can get a little boring. I've had that experience with some instrumental bands. I don't have that with Isobar. Every song it brings something new, and I am, you know, into every song as I go through it. And so I do my homework on a band, and it wasn't a chore to listen to music over and over again.
Well,
So
to me, it's
there
clear. I don't know, speaking for myself.
you're unique in that your band is the album names are 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's a little unique, but everyone brings something fresh, I think, and it's well received by all the guys that I know that are fans of your band. So anyway,
Absolutely.
Isobar 4 is out, and like I said, it's not common for a band like yours to get just accolades. Just I read review after review. Pete Pardo, some of the Prague staple reviewers, they just consistently say this is great music. You guys have any plans for the future? You already got something in the works for something coming
Oh
up?
yeah. Well, yeah, it never stops, you know. I mean, the music keeps coming, and so we're already working on the beginnings of some new material right now, and I couldn't say when that would be come to the forefront, but it's definitely underway and has been for a couple of 3 or 4 months already. So yeah, we're moving in that direction.
Well, looking back over the last, 20 years, I mean, has this been a rewarding experience for you? Can you look back and say, I'm proud of this work and I'm glad we did what we did?
Completely. Yeah.
I would say
Oh
so.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, very proud of it.
Well, it's been good to talk to you guys. I can't recommend this music enough. I mean, like I said, there's lots of my friends are into Isobar, and I hope we'll see something from you guys in the future. I want to thank you guys for being a part of this interview. You can find everything at isobarmusic.com. We're going to have links to all their music on here on the show, so check them out. But thanks, guys, for joining me.
Thank you very much, Kirk. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Long live
Thanks
the
for your
giant.
support, Kurt.
All
Yeah.
right. Thanks.